delighted to welcome Dr. Claire Standley. She's the Senior Biosecurity Initiatives Lead at CEPI, and she oversees implementation of CEPI's biosecurity capacity strengthening and innovation efforts. She also teaches at Georgetown University Center for Global Health Science and Security. She's actually trained as an infectious disease ecologist, and she's worked as a senior scientist at the George Washington University and as a science and technology fellow with AAAS and in the US Department of State's Biosecurity Engagement Program. I met Claire in person at the recent Global Health Security Conference in Kuala Lumpur, and I was delighted that we could snag her to do this talk. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Claire Standley. Claire, all yours.
Thank you again so much for the kind introduction and the opening remarks. It's really a pleasure to be here and to have such a globally diverse audience to speak to about CEPI and 3.0. So knowing that while CEPI is relatively prominent in the epidemic preparedness and response landscape, not everyone knows what it is. I'm going to start with just a brief overview and also talk a little bit about how we got to 3.0. So the journey from CEPI's origins to the place where we are now. So what is CEPI? So we are the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and we were founded in 2017 after the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. CEPI is an innovative global partnership between public, private, philanthropic, and civil society organizations, all working together to create a world in which epidemics are no longer a threat to humanity. So that's CEPI's overall goal. And the specific mission that CEPI was founded to do is to accelerate the development of vaccines and other biological countermeasures against epidemic and pandemic threats so that they can be accessible to all people in need. And just from a practical standpoint, CEPI is truly a global organization in the sense that we have 3 offices, one in Oslo, one in London, and one in Washington, DC. And CEPI is quite unique in terms of the role that we play in the preparedness and response ecosystem. So when we think about identifying an emerging epidemic all the way to getting vaccines into the people that need them, there's obviously a number of different steps. And CEPI plays quite a unique role that bridges this R&D gap, particularly early in the response. So we're focused primarily on early stage development of vaccines, particularly where there are insufficient commercial incentives. So typically taking candidates from a preclinical or early clinical stage to around phase 2. And there are some exceptions to that, which we can maybe go into later. But this slide really shows how CEPI can play that connector role across the global preparedness ecosystem. So linking the science and the manufacturing companies and regulators to the delivery partners who are then responsible for getting the vaccines, once developed and shown to be safe, out to the populations that need them. And we cannot do this without a collaboration of partners, of course. It's crucial to the success of our work to have these close collaborations. And as a public-private partnership, CEPI's primary governing body is, in fact, our board, which has representatives from our investor countries and philanthropic organizations, as well as independent members that represent competencies as diverse as industry and pharma to global health, basic research, resource mobilization, and also finance. And in addition to this, just to mention a bit more about how we're governed, we also have a scientific advisory committee that provides guidance and information and quite often challenges us on the assumptions that we're making as we do our work. And we also have a joint coordination group that leads a roundtable of independent institutions working in the preparedness and response space and with a particular interest in vaccine development. So I talked about moving from CEPI 1.0 to 3.0, and so we're really at the cusp of the 10-year anniversary of CEPI. And so CEPI 1.0 was our first phase from 2017 to 2021, and this really established CEPI as that innovative global coalition focusing on epidemic preparedness, and during the course of those initial few years, delivered some historic firsts, such as the first Lassa and Nipah vaccine candidates to enter phase 1 trials, and the launch of Enable, which is still to date the world's largest Lassa epidemiology study. Obviously, as we got towards the end of COVID 1.0, we entered the COVID-19 response years. And CEPI moved rapidly, providing early at-risk funding, so no regrets funding for vaccine candidates, and was one of the co-founders of COVAX to help support, deliver global manufacturing scale-up and expand access across LMICs. In total, CEPI supported 14 SARS-CoV-2 vaccine candidates, including, in fact, the world's first AI-designed vaccine, which is something I'll come back to a little bit later on the AI front. And of those, 4 achieved emergency use listing for global use, and 3 received domestic approval. And overall, COVAX, with CEPI as a member, delivered nearly 2 billion doses of COVID vaccines to 146 countries, which has been estimated to have averted almost 3 million deaths. And as we got towards the end of CEPI 1.0, and through the lessons learned with the historic speed of the COVID vaccine development experience, CEPI inspired the world by articulating the goal of developing and authorizing safe, effective, and accessible vaccines within 100 days of identifying a new pandemic threat. And this is, as Pauline mentioned in the introductory remarks, what we call the 100 days mission. And since that time, many governments, many regional bodies, industry, and civil society partners have also embraced and embedded this goal into their own strategies. And so CEPI 2.0 was really about investing in those building blocks that we would need to make the 100 days mission a reality. So this meant expanding on vaccine development investments, creating rapid response platforms, identifying and funding next generation vaccine innovations, and also establishing several networks for research and development as well as manufacturing across the world. Again, a number of firsts came out of this period, including the first vaccines against Lassa, Nipah, and MERS to enter phase 2 trials, and supporting technology transfer of the first licensed chikungunya vaccine to endemic manufacturers. And so now we've invested in these building blocks. What next for CEPI 3.0? And so what we're presenting as CEPI 3.0 is the next 5-year strategy, which we see as a new paradigm for epidemic and pandemic preparedness. And this is really about strengthening vaccine development across the pathogens, and more importantly, moving towards a viral family approach that will that relate to those most likely to cause the next outbreak, while also continuing to advance platform technologies and strengthen those networks, as I'll talk about more in a little bit. So once again, the 100 Days mission, just to underscore this, is really about beating viruses and stopping epidemics and pandemics at scale. So if the world can deliver a safe and effective vaccine within 100 days of a new pandemic, a new pathogen's genome being released, for example, we can definitely contain outbreaks before they spiral into true pandemics. And just to mention some of those countries and global leaders that have embraced the 100 Days mission, it's been endorsed by the G7, by the G20, and then specifically Japan, India, Singapore, South Korea, Australia, Canada, and the UK, who have embedded the 100 Days mission into their national strategies, signaling this shared responsibility for a global public good. And I think it's important to underscore that the case here is not just humanitarian, but also economic. We've helped support some analyses that have suggested that if COVID-19 vaccines had been available within 100 days, an estimated 8.3 million excess deaths could have been averted, and the economic payoff is extraordinary. Something like avoiding $15 to $20 trillion in global losses that could have been avoided, alongside, of course, the human costs as well. So all of this is to say that speed in vaccine development is one of the smartest investments we can make in global health security. So in terms of digging into CEPI 3.0 a little bit in more detail, again, this is another 5-year strategy. It will start next year, 2027, and CEPI is in the process of advancing the investment case and working with our investor countries and organizations to raise the funds that we will need to implement this strategy over the coming 5 years. And so CEPI 3.0 has 3 main priority areas. The first is taking an integrated viral family approach to vaccine development, so moving away from a very pathogen-specific narrow focus into a broader viral family approach. This is in line, I should say, with how other organizations are approaching this, as I'll talk about in a moment. Again, developing vaccine platforms that are available and ready to use at speed. and then integrating and ready to activate capabilities across various distributed networks. And so again, this builds on our past decade of proven impact, and we believe it has the power to unlock transformational change at national, regional, and global levels. So to go into each of these pillars in a little bit more detail, the idea of taking an integrated viral family approach to vaccine development is that we know that many of the viruses most likely to cause the next epidemic and pandemic come from a relatively small number of viral families. We believe that we can advance response-ready vaccines from many of these most threatening known epidemic pathogens, while also building shared scientific knowledge that could accelerate progress in vaccine development when it comes to an unknown threat, a potential new disease X. And so the way that we have prioritized these families means that CEPI will cover approximately 75% of the viral families that have been prioritized by the WHO and others as the highest risk. And again, we will continue to build on the pathogen-specific portfolios from CEPI 1.0 and CEPI 2.0 by taking prototype pathogens and really focusing on them as exemplars for how we can develop vaccines for other members or even unknown members of that viral family. Onto the platform approach, again, COVID-19 showed that we couldn't scale vaccines quickly enough to meet global need. And so we need to help develop platform technologies that can help enable rapid response. And so what a platform technology means is that you have pre-validated core components and only the pathogen-specific insert changes. With that extensive prior clinical safety and manufacturing data, we can cut development times and reduce regulatory risks quite dramatically. And ideally, this can also help support swift scale-up across global manufacturing networks, again, by pre-positioning those capabilities and developing those networks that can work together as quickly as needed when the next epidemic emerges. And then I just mentioned networks. And so, of course, all of these capabilities are supported by our global partners. And this will be networks that can be quickly activated to execute the 100 Days mission. So these include our laboratory networks. We have an existing centralized laboratory network, for example, that focuses on developing standardized assays for vaccine testing and immunogenicity assays. We also have a preclinical models network that's working to develop, again, standardized models for our priority viral families, and again, to share knowledge and capabilities between network members. And we also have clinical development, regulatory, and manufacturing networks, which will also support those elements of the 100 Days mission. And then finally, a core part of the 100 Days of CEPI 3.0, is the cross-cutting activities. So there are 4 cross-cutting themes that are embedded into CEPI 3.0, which are expected to enable and support those 3 primary pillars, as well as having their own deliverables associated with their activities. And so these are innovation, which includes AI-enabled technologies and approaches that we think will be critical to achieving the 100 Days mission. Equitable access, which sits very much at the core of CEPI's mission, and focus on end-to-end access roadmaps for all of the candidates that we help to develop. Regional partnerships, which again can help build on those networks by identifying key partners across all regions of the world that will help support our 100-day mission goals. And then finally, biosecurity, which I'm going to dig into a little bit more, since that's the team that I sit in and the area that I know the best. So just to tell you a little bit about CEPI and biosecurity, and in fact, why CEPI has a biosecurity function. Well, it was actually relatively new. It was established in 2023 with the idea that, with 2 real main driving ideas. One being that the 100 Days mission needs to be able to protect societies from all types of epidemics and pandemics, no matter what the origin, be it natural, as is most likely to be the case, but also if it were the result of a laboratory accident or deliberate misuse by malicious actors. So there needs to be some consideration of that spectrum. And then perhaps even more critically, CEPI to date has funded something close to $4 billion worth of research and development and manufacturing activities sometimes involving very dangerous pathogens, we need to make sure that our work is done safely, securely, and responsibly, and so that we aren't inadvertently the cause of the next epidemic. So to this end, as I mentioned, in 2023, CEPI established a dedicated biosecurity function, and we had a global consultative process over the following year to develop our first biosecurity strategy, which was released in 2024. And that consultative process had identified 5 key biosecurity vulnerabilities associated with CEPI's work on vaccine research, development, and manufacturing. And so the strategy outlines the 5 priority areas of focus that we would take over the following 2 years to address these vulnerabilities. And so that's, in summary, priority 1 is oversight of our own funded research, development, and manufacturing. Priority 2 is enhancing partnerships and capacity strengthening among those partners that we work with globally to do vaccine R&D and M. Priority 3 is equity, so recognizing the biosecurity and equity nexus and making sure that those two are taken into consideration. Priority 4 is addressing biosecurity risks associated with emerging and converging technology, as well as artificial intelligence. And priority 5 is identifying opportunities for accelerated innovation when it comes to biosecurity in ways that can also help to advance the 100 Days mission. So all taken together, the vision of the biosecurity strategy is really to help CEPI achieve the 100 Days mission safely, securely, and responsibly. And on the next slide, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on what that has looked like over the past year or so. So as you can see, we have achieved a lot. This slide is focused on the first year of the biosecurity strategy's implementation. And so you can see how it's mostly around how we have sought to position ourselves in the international ecosystem around biosecurity, but also strengthening our internal and external partnerships to facilitate rollout of those other priority areas. Maybe a couple of other highlights just to mention include how we responded to the M23 incursion in eastern DRC last year. So for those who may not be aware, armed militia groups came across the border into eastern DRC, toppling local governance structures and really taking control over vast swathes of territory. And in fact, in some areas, they remain in control even now. And this was challenging because we had a number of research partners that were based in those regions, and we worked with them very closely to help secure the specimens that they had collected, both on behalf of CEPI and other partners like WHO and LSHTM and CDC, some of which contained either Ebola or Mpox or other pathogens, to secure them so they would be safe from harm or misuse. And at the same time, we also launched a biosecurity training program for institutions across DRC, which built on WHO's laboratory biosecurity guidance. At the time, the WHO laboratory biosecurity guidance was only available in English. So as part of that effort, we also collaborated with WHO to produce a French translation, which is now available on the WHO website for anyone to use. And for that biosecurity training, we collaborated with UKHSA and Fondation Mérieux. And I think it's important to note that those partnerships, including also with the DRC institutions, which were already put in place in 2025, have proved critical to our ability to provide support during the current Bundibugyo Ebola epidemic, which I'll mention again a little bit later on. So I mentioned that equity is at the core of CEPI's overall mission, and so similarly, we've put it at the center of the biosecurity strategy. We envision a world where cutting-edge research, development, and manufacturing needed to achieve the 100 Days mission vaccine goal can occur in all world regions, and indeed should occur in those regions that have been affected by the emerging epidemic, both for speed, also for equity. And so to this end, our equity work is very closely aligned with our oversight and capacity strengthening activities, but also seeks to specifically integrate LMIC and Global South perspectives into all of the approaches that we do. And we're seeing that this is particularly important with respect to harnessing new technology, and especially with AI. in which already we see inequitable distribution both of the technologies themselves, but also where European and North American voices are already overrepresented in governance and risk management dialogues around how to use these technologies safely and securely. And that absolutely needs to change if we want to make sure that everyone can harness these technologies and that they serve the good of the global population and not just certain regions. And so we're now starting to look ahead to CEPI 3.0. And so from the perspective of the biosecurity team and as an enabling function, we're exploring ideas of how we will continue to serve as that one of those cross-cutting themes. And again, I really want to underscore this concept of being an enabler. I think many of us who have worked previously in the bench and have done scientific research may remember biosafety and biosecurity trainings as a bit onerous. It was something to be endured. Biosecurity regulations can sometimes be perceived as slowing down the science, and we absolutely want to flip that on its head. We want to present biosecurity as one of those enablers that can help accelerate progress towards the 100 Days mission by being pre-positioned and strong and robust in the places that need it most ahead of the next epidemic. And maybe an important part of how biosecurity fits into that CEPI 3.0 vision is in recognizing how the global landscape of threat is changing. So we know there is this persistent and perhaps, in fact, accelerating risk of natural emergence of high-threat pathogens driven by things like climate change, by land use change, by urbanization, agricultural change. But also we know that there are more and more labs around the world that have been developed and built to work on infectious diseases, including high-threat pathogens, and in some cases, without robust legislative or other regulatory oversight. And so the biosafety and biosecurity capabilities are not always very clear. Moreover, we know, of course, that emerging technologies like AI are transforming the biosecurity landscape and potentially are democratizing access to the types of information and tools that could be dangerous if in the wrong hands. So this is all set, of course, against the backdrop as well of the changing geopolitical landscape, changing funding streams. We've seen a huge upheaval in how global health is being funded around the world. And of course, also increasing defense budgets in many different countries. And so this has also prompted us at CEPI to recognize that although we have always been a very open, tented coalition of partners, we maybe need to be a bit more proactive and explicit about bringing the defense sector as part of our coalition and demonstrating that the 100 Days mission also aligns with defense and security goals. And I really want to underscore here that this is not about CEPI changing its mission in any way to go after defense dollars. No, this is really about demonstrating that our existing core mission, developing vaccines for the 100 Days mission, is actually something that the defense sector is already pursuing on their own. And so it would make sense for us to work together where it's logical and feasible to do so. And so it is important, of course, to have guidelines for how that engagement will take place. And you can see some of these on the slide. Particularly given historic and ongoing concerns about the securitization of health, but also to make sure that there isn't that risk of mission creep or mission slide one way or the other. But in any case, this is something that we see as very central to CEPI 3.0 and has already been a large focus of the past year. Excitingly, we've seen really strong support from the defense sector in countries where we've engaged to date around this policy alignment. So defense entities seem to very intuitively recognize that the 100 Days mission is very much aligned with their own defense, national security, and force protection goals. And the next step that we're working on is understanding how we can translate that into operational collaboration on specific projects or programs. And so I just want to end with the example of the current Bundibugyo response, since this is really proving to be an example of the 100 Days mission and CEPI 3.0 in action. So CEPI is pursuing a multi-track strategy to bring ideally at least 2 vaccine candidates to emergency use authorization, while also simultaneously investigating other countermeasures for potential protection. And so if we break down how this maps against the CEPI 3.0 pillars, We have a track that's supporting the development of rapid response platform vaccines. We have a track that's supporting platforms, so particularly RVSV and a few others. And then we have cross-protection studies trying to understand the biology of the disease and a small investment in investigational therapeutics. And all of this is being enabled also by additional activities around epidemiological modeling, biosecurity, regulatory alignment, clinical trial design, and others, again, to ensure that it's not just vaccines being developed in a vacuum, but that the capabilities are being supported throughout and that the vaccines will be used in the most appropriate way. And so again, just digging into the pillars a little bit more, from a viral family perspective, we had already deep filovirus family knowledge, which had previously been used more focused on other types of Ebola viruses. But we already had one program called the Filovax program, which was looking at a broadly protective Ebola virus vaccine, so multi-strain. And so that kind of knowledge has been very useful to translate into the identification and development of Bundibugyo specific or pan-philo candidates in this next phase. On the platform side, we've been able to draw on our portfolio of prioritized vaccine platforms to advance a number of investments in, I mentioned the RVSV platform, but in addition to that, also Oxford's ChAdOx platform and mRNA. And I think it's really important to note, some of you may have seen this on the news already, but within 8 weeks of us funding Oxford to develop a Bundibugyo ChAdOx vaccine, they're actually just about to start the phase 1 trial. So in less than 2 months, we've gone from 0 to a phase 1 candidate. And perhaps even more impressively, there's already an agreement in place between Oxford and the Serum Institute of India, and the Serum Institute has developed over 600,000 doses of this candidate vaccine ready to be deployed when needed for further clinical trials. So again, we're really seeing that 100 days time frame being enabled by viral family knowledge, the platform, and the existing partnerships that we had between Oxford, Serum Institute, and CEPI. And just to note specifically on the biosecurity side, again, I mentioned the biosecurity training partnership we had with Fondation Mérieux in DRC. And so we've been working very closely with Fondation Mérieux and the INRB in DRC to identify where there may be needs related to biosecurity. And we've been able to leverage a number of different coordination forums to help make sure that this work is both aligned with what's necessary on the ground, but also complemented by what else is happening with other provision of supports. And I think what's really exciting is that after CEPI decided to fund some materials and equipment, including 2 autoclaves, which are pictured here, it actually catalyzed a few of our other partners, such as the European Commission and hopefully also RKI, to identify funding that they could use to bolster these biosecurity aspects as well. So again, hopefully a good example of where a CEPI investment catalyzed contributions from other parts of the ecosystem in a coordinated way based on the needs that have been identified on the ground. And again, because of the context in DRC, with the insecurity, the handling a high consequence pathogen, and some of the logistical and infrastructure constraints that are being faced by the response, these are hopefully assets that will also contribute in the future to the rollout of clinical trials and other research activities that can help with different aspects of the 100 Days mission in the future. So I think I will pause there and see if there are any questions, but yeah, happy to dig into any of this in more detail. Thanks.